Our Sharpeville is a poem about a real-life historical event. This event took place in South Africa during the 1960s, when at least 180 black Africans were injured and 69 were killed when South African police opened fire on 300 demonstrators who were protesting against the pass laws. The pass laws were a system that was run under apartheid, where non-whites were not given the same rights and liberties as white people. The pass laws were there to restrict the movement of non-white people, and they had to carry a permit card whenever they went anywhere. The Sharpeville massacre became known throughout the world, and it signalled the start of armed resistance in South Africa, and it prompted worldwide condemnation of South Africa's policies on apartheid. And after this massacre, things did begin to change in South Africa. There is a useful YouTube video. If you just go onto YouTube and type in our Sharpeville, then this should come up, and this gives you lots of new different notes about the poem that you might be able to use. If we think about the title, we can think about the R and what that signifies. It could suggest ownership, so the person who is the persona in the poem is coming at it from their own perspective, as if this Sharpeville belongs to them. It's the perspective of a white person, and we need to think about why that's significant, what kind of bias they may have. The structure of the poem is in two very similarly structured stanzas, but there is a divide in the poem that you need to think about, and think about why that divide is there and what that could represent. In the first stanza, we can see that the poem takes the form of a monologue, and the fact that the persona was playing hopscotch indicates the age of the narrator, so we can see that they're a child, probably quite young, to be playing that game of hopscotch. The enjambed lines, where you can see the lines running onto each other, make it sound like speech, so there's that kind of tone to the poem. When the miners roar past in lorries, we've got personification and onomatopoeia of that roaring sound, and it interrupts this innocent moment of the child playing hopscotch and seems quite aggressive. The arms are raised, signals are crossing, possibly suggesting a border or a dividing line. Their chanting is foreign but familiar, suggesting that this young person sees them often enough so that they're familiar, but doesn't understand the words that they're saying, so there's this element of foreignness to them, element of difference. The juxtaposition of foreign and familiar and that alliterative sound helps to make you think about the safety of this child and whether that is just an illusion. Building arteries from the heart of the Transvaal mine is a metaphor talking about arteries linking that to heart, and if you think about the importance of your heart, everything is coming from that mine, suggesting it's really, really important for the community. The child runs to the gate to watch them pass, and we get a lot of imagery in this stanza, which sounds quite romantic and childish. Their perspective is associated with biblical imagery, the caravan moving across the desert to an oasis. It's all very positive. She remembers things from her Sunday school book and links in this imagery of olive trees in a deep jade pool, which is very positive sounding and also sounds safe. The Sunday school book and the fact that she talks about the silver stars that you get for being good suggests a good upbringing and a sound morality. Then we get a new stanza, which divides the 2 and 2 stanzas in the poem. And this represents the divide between the innocence of the narrator and the prejudice of the white community, and it completely shatters the romantic imagery that we've just heard. Then my grandmother called from behind the front door, her voice a stiff broom over the steps. Come inside, they do things to little girls. We need to think about who are they. They're not named, but it's clear that they're spoken about as dangerous, almost like animals. This represents the social divide and what the white grandmother is talking about. The metaphor of her voice as a stiff broom suggests perhaps that she's making sweeping generalizations by calling them they, and there's no relenting of this prejudice. The tone of the poem then changes and becomes more about the massacre. For it was noon and there was no jade pool, instead a pool of blood that already had a living name and grew like a shadow as the day lengthened. The juxtaposition of this image of the pool of blood with the positive imagery in the previous stanzas is quite shocking. The personification of the blood that already had a living name perhaps suggests it's taking over, it's growing, and may also be referring to the fact that this now becomes a massacre and is known worldwide. The voices that reach my gate suggest that it's close by, it's shattering her illusion of safety. These are not heroes in my town, but maulers of children, doing things that had to remain nameless. It's a continuation of her grandmother's lie, and perhaps the justification for why this massacre takes place. If this is the view that everybody in the community has, then they can suggest that what happened was justified. The well-swept streets suggest that their part of town is well looked after, and we can contrast this with conditions for non-white people. The final stanza talks about the girl and how she reacts to this situation. If I had turned, I would have seen brocade curtains drawn tightly across sheer net ones, known there were eyes behind both, heard the dogs pacing in the locked yard next door. The curtains drawing across suggests the closed community. She already knows what to expect. She knows what the community is like. She doesn't even need to turn round to see that. The locked yard and the closed rooms both suggest locking bad influences out. Walking backwards is repeated, and you need to think about why. Perhaps it's something to do with turning her back on her community. Perhaps she doesn't want to be associated with that community. She feels shame at being a girl, at being at the gate, at seeing these things, maybe not doing anything about it, at hearing the lie, and not questioning that maybe as much as she wants to. She seems to recognise it's likely to be a lie, but she's still concerned and she's still fearful about that. A question that you may get related to this poem is, how does the poet use imagery and juxtaposition to present social divide? You can think about the imagery that is related to the biblical imagery that the girl uses that suggests innocence, that suggests positive things, and how that changes. How things are put together, juxtaposed, to suggest difference and division. And if you want to practice that question, you should give yourself 15 minutes to do that. When thinking about what this poem could be compared to, you could compare it to Half Caste. It is about maybe a struggle to fit in, maybe an identity crisis, a conflict with race. Perhaps a better poem would be Belfast Confetti, where you have a conflict which affects an individual and is a personal response. Parade's End is also a racial conflict and similarly a closed-minded community, so that links in quite well. August the 6th, 1945 is about a historical conflict, a real-life situation, so that might be some links that you could make between those poems. And perhaps Invasion, which is maybe more of a subtle link, but you've got a contrast there between us and them.